What's up, everybody? It's Jasmine. Welcome back to another episode of A Girls Podcast with your host, Jasmine Rule. Today, we are talking about the dissolution, is that the right word, of the Frenemies podcast. So, this is very sad for me because I have found Frenemies an uplifting experience, especially when I was in hospital for my panic attacks. One of the things that really that's Swedish, that really picked up my mood on my second day there was looking forward to the release of the Frenemies podcast. And that was something that I felt was a real turning point in my sort of getting a hold of the anxiety, was realizing that there are things that I can look forward to that can distract me from my anxiety issues right now. So finding out that Frenemies is cancelled was really sad, and obviously I'm still struggling with anxiety, so I wonder what is there for me to look forward to distract me. I don't know. So yeah, really selfish reasons that I'm upset about the ending of Frenemies podcast. But I did want to talk about the sort of mental health issues that led to the destruction, implosion of the Frenemies podcast, and sort of what we can take away from this. So, for those of you that don't know, Frenemies is a podcast created with Ethan Klein from H3H3 Productions and Trisha Paytas, both really well-known YouTubers who have been on the platform for 10 years or more. Is that true? I don't know, but a really long time. So anyway, these two people have quite different personalities. Ethan sometimes has been mistaken to be a conservative person when in fact he's not, or he's changed quite a bit since then. But either way, he's said things that have made him appear to be not very... to be a bit of a conservative person in comparison with Trisha Paytas, who has lived quite a controversial life. She's done a lot of things like OnlyFans and sexual things that sort of lead to the perception that she's more, I guess, socially open, not very conservative when it comes to sexuality, that sort of thing. So you have these sort of two people who at different times are perceived to be really, really different ends of the spectrum type of thing. So they get together to make this podcast, and it's kind of been a learning experience for the both of them to work together to make this podcast and to discuss different topics that could lead to them having quite different opinions about it. But what actually has sort of happened is that they actually do have quite similar opinions about these sort of things. It turns out that they aren't really all that different, except that Trisha Paytas appears to not know certain things about the world. She seems quite ignorant at points, so Ethan has taken the role of sort of teaching her about different things. So anyway, the premise of the podcast is that they're quite different and they are learning to get along as frenemies. But during the production of this podcast, there have been different times where Trisha Paytas has been really upset and she's stormed off the set and I guess quit in a way. So it's been really volatile at points because Trisha Paytas suffers from mental illness, and as far as I know, she has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, but she also describes experiencing other mental disorders. So a lot of the breakdowns in the relationship at points have been blamed on this borderline personality disorder. Now, when Trisha Paytas made the final decision to cancel the podcast, she did it in a way that made it seem like she has really thought about this and come to a conclusion that isn't based on her mental illness. But what I think has happened is that she has gone for quite a while without having a breakdown on the show, whereas before, in the very beginning, it would be like every other week that she would have a breakdown, but now it's been sort of like a month, once a month having a breakdown. And I think what happened was that when she had this latest breakdown, she was taken aback by her own breakdown, and that really freaked her out, and that her response is still based on the complications that come with borderline personality disorder, the sort of black and white thinking, the inability to come to an agreement with other people, to meet people halfway. I think that this is actually I think that she thinks that she's making a smart decision, when in fact I think that it's her mental illness that is making this decision. And I think that what we can learn from this is that when you're in the process of recovering from a mental illness, you get to a point where you really start to feel a lot better, and then you feel as though you have the power to make clear decisions not based on your mental illness. But what I think the reality is that once you start feeling better, you can still be strongly influenced by your mental illness in a way that isn't as obvious. So what I mean is that your mental illness can kind of trick you into making decisions that are really not beneficial to you. So a good example of that is when you're recovering from an eating disorder. Let's say you have anorexia, you are at a lower weight, your BMI is on the lower scale, you start to eat again, you are no longer in the sort of cloud of the numbness of the anorexia, the starvation. So you start to come out of that, and your thoughts start to feel a lot more normal. You start to think about other things beside food and weight loss and things like that. So then your mind might put an idea in your head. For example, I've gained a lot of weight. It might be time to cut back on the food because I don't need to gain as much weight now. And because you're no longer in this very heavy cloud of anorexia, you kind of think that this is a normal thought, that it's a thought that is worth exploring, and you might decide to cut back on the food, thinking that it's a good decision, not dictated by your anorexia. And this is an experience that a lot of people recovering from eating disorders have. They make the progress in their eating disorder, they start to gain weight, and then they stall, and then they start to fall back. And I've experienced it myself, and you really do believe that you're making the best decision. So in this case, Trisha Paytas has expressed that this podcast has been really good for her mental health, that she's really enjoyed it, and she really is sad that it's ending. So why then would she quit the podcast? I think it's because she has made progress in her mental disorder, and she thinks that these negative thoughts in her head that she should quit because she's not being respected, that she's not being an equal partner in the podcast. She thinks that they are reasonable thoughts not connected to her borderline personality disorder. So this is just, one way that your mental disorder can sneak up on you. And I think that it's especially dangerous when you are in the recovery phase from a mental disorder. You're actively seeking treatment because you really feel as though you have made a lot of progress when your thoughts are still, unfortunately, sometimes hijacked by your mental disorder. So the things that we can do is to seek advice from other people, seek advice from your therapist, make a list of things. Like Trisha Paytas was listing all of the ways that she really enjoyed the podcast, and then, the list of things that she didn't like were kind of things that could really be worked out, could really be met halfway, through discussion and trial and error, but her black and white thinking didn't allow that to happen. So seeking advice from other people, making a list, seeing that actually, there's a whole lot of good reasons to not quit the podcast. There's a whole lot of good reasons to not cut back on your food. And then obviously another thing would be to just keep on doing what you're doing. Like keeping on doing the podcast instead of making, quite a big decision. Keep on eating food at the same rate instead of making the big decision to cut back on the food. Keeping on the status quo because that has actually been working, right? So yeah, that's some advice for everybody. I thought that obviously I'm really upset about the ending of the podcast, but I think it's also a good learning experience for everybody who suffers from mental illness. The recovery stages are really, really difficult, and it's really easy to be set back because you are tricked by your mind and your thoughts. So a good learning experience, and I'm also going to apply it to myself with my anxiety. Now that my anxiety has lifted a little bit, when I get thoughts like, Jasmine, you need to find a solution to this potential problem. You need to think about this on and on again until you find a really good solution. Because I'm feeling better, I think, yeah, that's a good idea. I should think and come up with a solution to this problem. But really, no, I shouldn't, because that's just going to start a cycle of continuing to think about this thing and build up anxiety. So what I actually have to do is to continue to ignore my thoughts and continue to think about other things and not that thing that my mind is trying to tell me, oh, you feel better now, you can totally think about this thing and not be anxious. It's a lie. I have to keep on doing what I've been doing from the start and, keep on feeling better, keep on trying to live and reduce anxiety. So yeah, that was a pretty good educational podcast, I think. But yes, I am pretty sure that most people who watch this podcast have not been watching Frenemies. So this might not be necessarily relatable for a lot of you, but yeah, obviously I make a lot of videos about my own experience. So this is my experience. This is what I've been thinking about. Super sad about the ending of the Frenemies podcast. But one good thing that has come out of it is that I've actually found that I like the other H3 podcasts. So they have Off the Rails, which I like less because Gila isn't in it. But on Friday they have H3 After Dark, which has Gila and Ethan. So that's Ethan's wife. I like that one a lot more because I think, as a female, it feels a lot better when there's another you know, there's a female on a podcast, because it feels more like you have somebody on your team. So if they're talking about issues like sexual assault or things like that, you know, in regards to a female, it feels a lot better when there's another female there, because it, you know, it feels like there's, you know, a female advocate on the team. Now obviously that isn't always the case, but for me it feels a lot better. And also she has quite a different personality from her husband, I think. You know, she's like this artistic businesswoman who is, she grew up in Israel, so it's like, you know, quite different lives really. So yeah, that's gonna be it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I will see you in the next episode. Yeah, that's gonna be what is gonna happen. Please check out my Etsy if you're interested in possibly buying some prints of my art. There's also like postcard size things. Yeah, I'll put a link for that in the description down below. I probably should have talked about it earlier in the podcast so that I would get more like traffic to it. But anyway, if you've watched to the end, that's really impressive. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys all next time. Hey, door.